Hello folks, in today's guide we are going to be breaking down the rage emotion weapons and glyphs, taking a look at how they are best used in combat and what playstyles the rage emotion most suits. To start us off, we're going to cover some of the combat basics, so if you've watched any of these emotion guide videos before, then do feel free to skip this section and head straight to the timestamp below. Beginning with the setup, we have health and stamina right here, and then a third mechanic named endurance, which is this little white bar. Essentially, endurance just means your health will dictate your stamina, so having low health will mean low stamina reserves too. Then below this, we have limbic energy, which is used for certain attacks and abilities. Light attacks reward limbic energy back based on that particular weapon's limbic theft, whereas the heavy attacks do cost limbic energy. They also need to be charged and have different tiers of charging that will cost various amounts of limbic energy. Then we have dodging and blocking, which both do exactly as they say on the tin. There is also a parry mechanic, however, it will only work against specifically telegraphed attacks, such as these attacks right here. In order to parry, you just press and hold the block button once you see this red glow appear. It doesn't matter if you press it as soon as you see the red glow or right at the very last second. All that matters is you press and hold at any point after seeing the red glow. And finally, trying to parry any other attacks will just result in blocking instead. To add to all of this, parrying and various other abilities will drain enemy posture, and once fully drained, they will enter into this vulnerable state, which then allows for you to execute them outright. Adding to this, when fighting enemies with respective emotions, whilst the emotion is still present, attacking enemies will not cause damage and will instead directly impact their posture. So you can theoretically immobilize all enemies before destroying the emotion, to then begin executing them all afterwards. The final mechanic to cover is the self-healing. Essentially, when you attack an enemy in any way, other than I think most, if not all abilities, then you will build up this white energy, and then upon pressing the correct button prompt once this white ring appears, you will recover a portion of health, respective to how much you just previously dealt out. However, receiving damage will interrupt this effect. The trick to this mechanic is simply waiting for the ring to form before pressing the button. Too soon and it will fail. However, the period it exists is quite forgiving. The only punishing aspect is if enemies hit you before the ring is formed, in which case you will want to try and dodge first before trying to heal. Now, with the combat basics out of the way, let's cover weapons very quickly. All four weapon types have various different proficiencies in limbic energy, parry potential, attack speed, etc. However, these do not vary based on emotion. So for example, all greatswords of different colour but of the same level will have identical stats. Now, as for which emotion you want on each weapon, this really does only determine available glyphs, and while some glyphs work slightly better with some weapons than others, which we will cover in this guide, it does basically mean that the emotion you choose for the weapon doesn't matter all that much outside of what glyphs you'd actually like to use with that weapon. So, with all of the basics covered, we're going to dive into all 5 glyphs available, how they work, and which weapons they suit slightly better than others. To start us off, we have Wave of Wrath, which basically sends out a cone of spikes in front of you that can damage multiple enemies at once. Next, we have Rage Spike, which is a solid ranged attack. It can be used whilst moving and helps keep you quite mobile, and the projectile itself explodes to deal damage in a very small vicinity. Fury is an attack that can be charged and has separate stages. When releasing the charge, you will dash forward slightly and deliver an attack that will share damage with all other enemies connected to the enemy you attacked. Animosity is a ranged attack that will pull enemies towards you whilst debilitating them slightly. It doesn't deal any damage, but it is good for picking out a target amidst the pack and has some solid range. And then finally, we have Berserk, which is a buff that lasts 30 seconds and basically prevents you from being stunned, staggered, knocked back, or any other crowd control effect. Overall, the Rage Glyphs do have a very aggressive playstyle, with one ability being the Berserk buff that allows you to fight through enemy attacks and focus entirely on just dealing out damage. This complements all weapons, but mostly the Greatsword due to it being slow and not very proficient in blocking or parrying, so you can very much just fight through and not be interrupted. Rage Spike is very good for all weapons, as you can move quite quickly whilst using it, and for this reason, I really liked it with the Greatsword again. The splash damage isn't great, but at least it's there. It's mostly a single target attack, but it can have some area of effect uses, due to the fact that it gives off this brief stagger moment. Wave of Wrath and Fury are both good for groups of enemies, but still work quite well on single targets too. They do appear to be designed to suit either scenario, and the same applies to Rage Spike with its single target nature, but still having splash damage. These work well with all weapons and don't tend to favour any more than the others. And then Animosity is one of the most solid abilities when facing groups of enemies and wanting to pull your target out and away from the pack. It ties in nicely with most fights due to facing multiple enemies quite often, and it suits the sword and greatsword slightly more due to their inherent single target nature. But generally, all abilities do work well with all weapon types. So, in summary, the Rage Emotion offers a varied and well-balanced but also very aggressive playstyle, having ranged area of effect and single target attacks, whilst having a single buff focused entirely around being aggressive also. It's very much the Berserker playstyle, where being very aggressive and focusing mostly on dealing damage should be at the top of your priorities, and it stands by itself quite well, not really lacking anything within its kit, while still being unique and defined with its aggressiveness. I really did like the Rage Emotion, and found myself using Rage Spike, Animosity, and Berserk the most, mainly because they suited the Greatsword quite well, and that was my main weapon. Anyway, that is it for this guide, folks. I'll be back over the coming days with all 3 emotions and neutral videos, so 5 glyph videos in total. And I do, of course, have a range of guides and news videos on the channel, so do feel free to stop on by and check things out. Otherwise, thanks for watching, folks, and until next time, peace.